Starting on April 2nd, the Second Battle of Ypres took place on the Allied salient into Belgium, a bulge in the Allied line that protruded into German-controlled territory to encompass the town of Ypres. This was an incredibly important position for the Allies to hold because it had access to the English Channel. If the Germans were to take the position, they would seize a major port for British reinforcements and supplies, significantly damaging the British contributions to the war, as well as damaging Allied morale. In addition to this, it was the last part of Belgium that wasn't under hostile German control. After the First Battle of Ypres, where the Allies secured this position, it became a symbol of defiance against the Germans.
The Second Battle of Ypres was the Canadian forces' first appearance in the Second World War. Before the battle, the Allies did not see Canada as a strong force because they were a colony. When the war initially broke out in 1914, the German forces did not expect the Triple Entente to call on their colonies. Germany being a fairly new empire meant they had few colonies spread throughout Africa, but almost nothing compared to the British, who controlled about 23% of the world's population at that time. At the Battle of Ypres, these British colonies fought alongside Britain and France, British India, Canada, the Union of South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Newfoundland, and the French colonies that fought were Algeria and Morocco.
The Canadians' living conditions were not very good. They lived in the trenches, which were mud puddles filled with vermin and diseases, oftentimes also housing dead bodies. The worst time in the trenches was night, for its eerie, unsettling presence. The Germans started off with the usual way of artillery fire on the enemy line. Once all the shells had been fired, it went quiet.
The Minister of Military Defense at the time of World War I had insisted on sending the Canadian troops with the Ross rifle and the MacAdam shovel. This proved not only problematic but dangerous. The Ross rifle is essentially a gentleman's hunting rifle and is not designed for trench warfare as the Germans' Gewehr 72. The best strategy a Canadian could ever have was to kill a German and take his gun. That way, you wouldn't be caught dead in the water.
5,700 cylinders of poison gas, stored in liquid form, were transported to the German front line for use in the Battle of Ypres. The Germans waited until the wind was blowing over the Allied lines. At 5 p.m., April 22nd, warfare was changed forever as the Germans released 160 tons of chlorine gas on the Allied troops. It is much more dense than air, so it infiltrates all of the trenches and craters that the Allied soldiers were using as cover. Unlike a machine gun that is useless against an entrenched enemy, the gas doesn't require a line of sight and surpasses the Allied defenses. Without gas masks, there was not much hope of survival. The death caused by chlorine gas is described in detail by Lance Sergeant Elmer Cotton, but can be summed up quite thoroughly as, quote, a fiendish death to die, end quote. The lungs fill with mucus, causing the equivalent to drowning on land.
When the first gas attack occurred, nobody was prepared. Canadians saw it for what it was, poison gas, as it came creeping up in a cloud of yellow and green. When telling this to the British higher-ups, they were told, civilized countries don't use poison gas. They were wrong. This was because it hadn't been used since it was banned at the Hague Conference in 1899 by Tsar Nicholas II.
The first gas attack of the Battle of Ypres occurred on April 22, 1915. The chlorine gas heavily hit the French-Algerian trenches, which were located left of the Canadian-British trenches. The Algerians fled their trenches, leaving the Canadians at the front. There was now 6 kilometers of unmanned trenches to the left of the Canadians. The British-Canadian forces ran to fill the holes, and after hours of fighting, they managed to stop the German forces from encircling them and marching the city.
Was ist das?
The Canadians! After the first gas attack, the Canadians fought hard to keep their line despite being outnumbered.
Needless to say, the city had to be held. Allied forces were on the defense, waiting for reinforcements to arrive so they could push the Germans back and obtain Belgium. This, of course, started a lengthy war of attrition.
The Canadians have now been hit with a second attack of lethal chlorine gas, this time directly meant for them. The Germans were attacking in an attempt to wipe out the entire Canadian division. This has not been successful. This gas will produce flooding in the lungs, a splitting headache, and your skin will turn greenish. This may be one of the worst ways to die. As the gas hazed over the Canadian line, the Canadians discovered that by putting urine-soaked handkerchiefs on their mouths and noses, that they could continue on and be tenacious and survive. Although they were deaths, This has still been considered an amazing battle for Canada so far.
On April 25th, the British and French reinforcements arrive, and the hard-fighting Canadian troops are, for the most part, relieved from their stay at the front. With more numbers, the battle is more controlled. The initial surprise of gas gone, the Allies began to prepare for future gas attacks. Chemical gas weapons quickly became the most feared weapon in World War I.
A 2.5 miles draw closer to Ypres was proposed by General Smith-Dorrien. He was dismissed by the Commander-in-Chief of the British Expeditionary Force, Sir John French. A withdrawal was then suggested by General Herbert Plumer, Smith-Dorrien's replacement. His plan was accepted and resulted in a failed Allied counterattack on the 29th of April. Between the 1st and 3rd of May 1915, the French executed the plan of withdrawal.
After the Canadians held the line, stopping German forces, the world's views changed. No longer were they not respected and looked over, they were now praised and feared for doing what no one else could do.
After the Second Battle of Ypres, the Canadians are now praised and seen as courageous soldiers. Despite this, there were over 2,000 Canadian deaths. As a tribute to the brave soldiers who lost their lives in this battle, John McCrae, a Canadian Army Medical Corps officer, wrote this poem called In Flanders Fields. In Flanders Fields the poppies blow, between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly. Scarce heard amid the guns below, we are the dead, short days ago. We lived, felt dawn, saw sunsets glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe, to you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours, hold it high, if ye break faith with us who die. We shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields.
If Allied forces had lost the Second Battle of Ypres, World War I would have been much different, without the possession of direct access to the English Channel. Germany would be able to move reinforcements more efficiently and have a stronger navy due to the two major ports that they would then possess. Allied troops would have been pushed further back, and Belgium would essentially be lost. Although Allied forces became victorious, casualties were brutal on both sides. More than 6,000 men lost their lives within a span of 4 days. Roughly, that is 16 casualties in 15 minutes for every hour troops were on the battlefield.